James Lutton, delighted today to be joined with the Colonel, Bob Sheridan. Colonel, how are you?
How you doing? It's great to be on with you. It's always a pleasure to be visiting somebody across the pond.
Absolutely likewise, and I appreciate your time and an absolute legend in the sport of boxing. Today we are going to talk about Muhammad Ali. You've covered a number of his fights. We're going to start off. We're going to go back to the Rumble in the Jungle, the Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman. Now you worked on this show. First of all, talk to me a little bit about that fight, and obviously now looking back, it's easy to look in hindsight of the magnitude of the fight. But what was it like at the time?
At the time, I knew it was big, but as we look back, 60 years now, I never had any conception of just how big it really was in the terms of the history of boxing, the history of the night, Muhammad winning the title back, the crowds, the weather, the just everything involved with that fight was multiplied times 20.
At the time, I think I'm right in saying George Foreman went into that as the favourite. Everyone thought he was going to knock out Muhammad Ali, and obviously Ali did pull off the upset. What was it like to be a part of that event?
Well, to be part of it was just huge. I was a young man at the time, and it was I had already done several of Muhammad Ali fights and several of George's fights. I was with George when he won the title, beating Joe Frazier in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was with Ali in March of 1973. Actually, did color commentating with me on the telecast when George destroyed Kenny Norton in the fight in Caracas. And of course, that fight was only being used as a promotion to talk about the fight in Zaire. And George knocked him out in the second round, so there was no time to really build up the fight coming up in the fall. And so it was very, very humorous of Ali because the producers came out and said, "Come on, we got to do something. Get him cranked up. We got to build up the fight in Zaire." So I was very friendly with Muhammad because I started calling fights in Miami back in the '60s, and this is 1973 now. So I had plenty of experience and had plenty of opportunity being around Muhammad, so I knew him quite well because, of course, the Dundees promoted those weekly fights that I had done, and so I had extraordinary access to Ali. So I get up there and I say, Ali, tell me, how do you have any chance at all against George Foreman? I mean, after all, he just disposed of a guy that beat you twice, and of course, the first fight, which was in San Diego, all of a sudden Ali comes up with what was supposedly a broken jaw, a tooth was missing, and he beat him in that fight. And then the second fight, which was in the Forum in Hollywood, he beat him in that fight too, but Ali got the decision because of the way Angelo Dundee would have not only Ali but other terrific fighters that he had put on these flurries at the end of rounds. So in any close round, it left the crowd just on its feet and screaming and yelling, and he'd win rounds that he didn't really win. That happened in the career of Sugar Ray Leonard as well. So that was kind of a trait. So anyway, Ali says to me, he says, "What do you mean he beat me twice?" I said, "Yeah, well now you're going home to Africa to fight him, and you get no chance in the world." And he says, "When I get you home to Africa," he says, now he used the word home to Africa. He says, "I'm going to put you in a pot and cook you," which was great television at the time. And it showed a great relationship between myself and Muhammad. And then the producer comes on afterwards. He says, "That was great. Can you do that again?" I do it again. What are you kidding me? That was one of the greatest lines in the history of boxing. And you want me to recreate it live? No, I said we can't do it again. That was his answer to that, and it became a famous line.
Absolutely. You mentioned something very interesting then. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. Obviously, you was using that to build the fight with having Mohammed there commentating with the George fight. What was it like to prepare for a mega fight with Muhammad Ali? What goes into the research and the preparation to build up to this?
I'll tell you, my mentor, a fellow by the name of Red Barber, who was like the greatest announcer. He would compare with your guys like of the time, Reg Gutteridge or Harry Carpenter or any of those fellas. And he was my mentor. And the thing that he taught me, number one, Jim, was preparation. You got to be prepared. If you think you're going to do an hour telecast, be prepared for 2 or 3 hours. I took that through my entire career. In fact, even today, getting ready to do a little interview, I looked up and found out a little bit about you. I had my CIA boys out there checking you out. But, you know, if you're prepared and you're going on the air, that takes away about 85% of the nerves. The rest of it, you want to have a few nerves because, the last thing we have on the air today is news and, of course, sport, which is live, and they don't put races on microphones. It's truly exciting to do a live telecast, as you know, Jim. And so if you're prepared, you know your material, you're all set.
You mentioned being prepared. With somebody like Muhammad Ali, was it ever unpredictable?
Was totally unpredictable all the time. Great question. You never knew what with Ali, because you didn't know whether he was concentrating on what you were doing. He had a wild eye for the women, so his eyes were always going around all over the place, and that didn't make any difference whether you're on the air or off the air. That was Ali. But I knew Ali so well, it didn't make any difference to me. I just had to keep him focused enough to do the telecast. Because again, the main job of that fight, Jim, was to prepare for the big fight coming up in Zaire in the fall.
Absolutely. You mentioned as well Joe Frazier, Thriller in Manila, another, legendary fight. Now looking back, it's another one you worked on with Ali. So talk to me about that fight and the build up to that. It's obviously the third fight between the pair.
Well, that of course was another classic, but it wasn't like Zaire because there were two reasons why it wasn't like Zaire. Number one, it was voted the greatest fight of the century, which it wasn't. Both of those fighters were over the hill, but they were both over the hill at the same stage in their careers, both physically, mentally, and every other which way. Another exotic place, but nothing could be more exotic than Zaire. And so for me, it wasn't as big. While that fight was a great, great battle, again, it wasn't as if they were battling in their prime. And then the fight would have been a lot more interesting, in my opinion. And again, by Ring Magazine, it was voted the greatest fight of the century. But those are my opinions, or at least my thought on why I don't think it was the greatest fight ever. And they almost killed each other. Believe me, they put out all they could possibly do, James, and they and they almost did kill each other. Joe was a good friend of mine too. In fact, we toured all over the South Pacific and Australia and New Zealand for about 10 days together, and we had an awful lot of fun. Joe was like two different people. If he wasn't drinking, a lot of fun to be around. And I'll tell you a funny story. The first day we arrived, we were working for an oil company, and they had it very well produced with the television cameras and the whole setup for the corporate show that it was. And in the middle of the show, Joe falls asleep, and so I go, we just arrived in town, and so I'm going, and Joe, and he goes, oh, I said, I know it's been a long day for you, but the fellas want to see you, so I know I'm boring you, but stay awake. And I had that relationship with Joe. And then I explained to everybody, which made it a better story. I said, this guy just flew from Philadelphia to Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Then we flew all the way over here to Australia. And, it's been a long day for the champ. And on top of that, he's had a lot of very tough fights. Interesting, though it may be, excuse me for 1 second here. Uh, uh, Joe didn't want to leave in the part where he lost so brutally in Kingston George because he really looked bad in that. I mean, he was lifted off the canvas, and I said, "No, no, no, you got to leave it in because it shows the courage that you had. You came off the canvas about 4 or 5 times, and you were virtually knocked out 3 or 4 of those times, and you still came back, and it shows the great courage. And I think that's important for you to document the historical factor of what kind of a guy you were and what kind of a guy you are. Tells a lot about a guy's character. I mean, Jim, in our business, everybody's with you when you're on top. You make one mistake with I always love to use the term with no erasers on the microphone, and watch how quick they can turn on you, And so, with that in mind, I have great moments of that nobody else is alive that can even refer to this stuff anymore. In fact, I was doing a piece with some of your colleagues from England there a few days ago, and we talked about the rumble in the jungle, and as we're talking about the thriller in Manila, and of course they wanted to know what kind of guys they were, and I think that when you consider that besides Jerry Eisenberg, the great writer, myself, Gene Kilroy, who ran the camp for Muhammad Ali, and Rahman Ali are the only 4 people that are still alive from Zaire that covered that fight. You get a few guys in England that were there, a good few guys from England, because the British press boys are well respected by the American elitists in terms of boxers.
Absolutely. I want to go on to, in terms of both men very well. Like you mentioned there, Mohammed and Joe Fraser. Just sticking with the Frederick Manila side of things now. There appeared to be a lot of hatred between the two, maybe earlier on, maybe the first couple of fights. Did you see that any animosity between the pair?
Well, there wasn't any on Muhammad's side because everything that Muhammad did was to promote the fight. But Joe took exception, and especially you got to remember this. You know, in England at the time, there were plenty of black athletes and black fighters, but in the United States, even though you get great history with black fighters going back to, oh God, Sonny Liston, and prior to that, Joe Louis, and the great black fighters of the historic magnitude. But other than boxing, it wasn't like it is in England, where you have so many guys from the old empire, and we didn't have that. So these fighters were like the black fighters were like gods amongst the what they call African American fighters of today, and so they were all historic events for many, many reasons, Jim, and that was one of them, and shouldn't be overlooked. And because what we're talking about right now is the history of boxing over the past, let's say, 60 years, and my voice is the voice track of all of these great fights, including a lot of your guys in England.
No, absolutely. Sticking with a few of the fights, so you've done, Ali Norton 3, you've done Ali Shavers, you've done both Ali Leon Spinks fights, and Ali Larry Holmes. Now, I want to mention the Larry Holmes fight because it wasn't the same Muhammad Ali as we came to love. He was very faded. It was obviously the end of his career, and he had one more fight after that, but it just wasn't the Ali that we knew. Was it sad to see that?
Yes, it was for me, especially because I knew Ali wasn't himself, and certainly only shadows of what he used to be. Larry Holmes was a great fighter, and he trained with Muhammad several times in the gym, in the Fifth Street Gym in Miami Beach. And Larry loved Muhammad, and he was just beating him from pillar to post. And I remember because Chris Christopherson was my color commentator in that fight. And I don't know if you know the whole history of Chris, but he's quite an interesting guy. You know him from the movies, and you know him from Waylon Willie and the Boys, and you know him for different reasons. But he was also a captain in the United States Army. He actually taught at West Point. His father was a general. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He loved boxing. But when he came in, he said to me, he said, Bob, he said, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. He said, my agent got me this gig. And, at that time, He just done the movie with Barbara Streisand and the Highwaymen and all of that. So he was a very popular guy. But when he came along and he said, it's really a thrill to work with you. I just got goosebumps. I mean, Chris Christopherson says to Bob Sheridan, it's a thrill to work with you. Well, I said, Chris, and I had no idea that I might have some sort of military career down the line myself someday. And so that was a big thrill for me. Uh, but in our business, Jim, you get introduced to a lot of famous people because after all, we're entertainers. And so the people that go to boxing matches, they don't go really to see the fight. They go, my old cattle buddies and I, and you say, today, Bob, we'll go to the cattle auction and we're going to see and be seen. Great line. To see and be seen. And that's what it was like at a major boxing or any sporting event. And it's the same is true in the UK.
No, absolutely. Um, in terms of Mohammed, like I say, you had a good relationship with him outside of the ring also. What's your favourite memory with Mohammed?
My favorite, well, there's a lot of favorite memories, but I don't want to bore your audience. But one that sticks out in my mind is when Muhammad Ali was actually, because of political reasons and whatnot, was banned from the ring. Although I must say this about the British Boxing Board of Control, they never stripped him from the title. In England and the UK, you either win or lose your title in the ring. They don't strip the title like they did here in the United States. In the United States, let's be honest, it was strictly for political reasons, and it had to do with the war. It was much bigger than just boxing. But Ali himself was bigger than boxing. I mean, when you're talking about athletes that were as bigger than, you're talking about guys like Pele, Georgie Best in England, the greatest of the greatest in their individual sport, and certainly Ali was that. Lennox Lewis was that for a long time in England. Stevie Collins, Nigel Benn, the great, great, great UK fighters over the years. And I would say, with all of the guys that became world champions, that I had a relationship with all of them, which I thank God for because it was nothing that Bob Sheridan, the announcer, did. It was Bob Sheridan, the guy that was calling the fight, that happened to really know boxing because I went to the gym 2 or 3 days a week. So I was prepared. But you asked a specific question about a memory, and I want to get this in because it was when Ali was out. Joe Frazier was considered heavyweight champ in 3 states, and Jimmy Ellis had won the six fighter tournament. So he was considered the WBA heavyweight champion of the world and was only the WBA at that time. So we're doing a promotional piece. And the idea of the piece was for local television in the United States was, who does the boxing commentator think is the greatest fighter of all times? And I said, there's only one way to settle this. And I was a pretty good athlete. I was a professional baseball player, as a professional bull rider in the rodeos. I was in shape in those days, not the shadow of what I used to be, or at least in my mind. So we decided, at least the producers decided, why don't you spar 1 minute with each fighter? I said, oh man, this will be great. So again, we go back to my relationship with the fighters. So Ali is first, and Ali is just kind of toying with me. He's got the jab in my face. He's got his hand on my head, and he's kind of just pushed me around. And that was Muhammad Ali for a minute. I tried to take a couple of shots, and I couldn't get near him. Then next was Joe, and Joe and I again good friends, and he muscles me around, and every once in a while he'd hit me to the body. But even though I was in pretty good shape, I couldn't stand up against his punches. If he didn't pull the punch, I'd have been down. Now, of all three of the guys, the one that I was closest to at the time was Jimmy Ellis, and Jimmy was blown up middleweight, and he became heavyweight champion of the world. He defeated Jerry Quarry to win that tournament and was the champ. So Jimmy and I, again, really close friends. And Jimmy goes out there and he said, "Come on, Bob, try to hit me." And don't you know, I cracked him. 2 seconds later, I'm on my keister. He hits me with a shot to the ribs, and I go, "Oh," like this. Ah, my mouth open. He go boom like that with about a two-inch punch, and I'm down, and I'm down, and I'm down hard. And Jimmy sticks out his hand, and as he's pulling me up, I took another shot at him. And no sooner do I hit him than I'm back down again. He says, "You want to keep dancing?" I said, "I'd love to keep dancing with you, James, but a good man knows his limitations, and you got me." So when the show goes on the air, of course, I declared Jimmy Ellis the greatest heavyweight of all time, which was a BS thing, and everybody knew it. But it was a great thing for me because it showed the relationship with the fighters. It showed the sense of humor of all three of them, and most important for my ego, it showed my great relationship with the fighters that they'd even do it. But I don't have a copy of that tape, and of all the things that I've done over the years, I would love to see that. And egocentrically speaking, I would have loved to see me with my shirt off and in good enough shape to get in the ring with these guys. But that aside, that's a day that I'll never remember involving all three of them.
Absolutely fantastic story there. Tell me one thing, if there is anything that surprised you about Muhammad.
The thing that surprised me the most about Muhammad was his extraordinarily, well, number one, he had God given ability. Number two, he was big. Number three, he could take a shot. Number four, he worked harder than anybody could possibly imagine. And that came into play big in Zaire because I used to watch him in his workouts in front of the media, including the British press boys who he loved. And he then he'd go back in the gym with this trainer. His name was Louis Sarir, a Cuban trainer. And remember, we're talking about the 50s, 60s here now, and in the early 70s, in 74, especially in Zaire. And Sarir would work on his stomach while Ali would do these sit ups with his trunk going over the edge of the training table. Picture this now, folks. Here he is going back, and he's way over the edge of the training table, and he'd do 1,000 of those sit ups a day, 1,000 of them. I mean, for most people, if they tried to do 100 of them, they wouldn't be able to do it. But even if they were, a really good athlete and they did 100 of them, their stomach would be so sore the next day they wouldn't be able to move for 2 days. And here's Ali doing 1,000 of them a day. So I had that in my little bag of tricks. You talk about preparation again. And I knew that it was going to be hard for George to hurt him to the body, especially as the rounds progressed. And that became a major part of the fight with the rope a dope thing that I discovered immediately because I didn't know what was coming up ahead of time. I wasn't aware of it, but as soon as it started in about the second round, I realized what was going on. Because Angelo Dundee, who was credited with tightening the ropes, was in fact loosening the ropes. And it doesn't take a genius in boxing to realize loosening the ropes, what are they up to? Usually they want them nice and tight so a guy comes flying off the ropes and he can cut loose with the right hand. That wasn't the case. He wanted George coming in, throwing these thundering, booming. Remember, his arms were about this big around, built a lot like Lennox Lewis, a lot like the other big heavyweight that I'm trying to think of over there. Oh God, help me out here now. He was the first guy that pushed him back in the ring, and anyway, that I realized immediately that something was up. And so that again, preparation, a little bit of knowledge, and it went a long way that particular night.
Was it Frank Bruno?
Frank Bruno, that's it. Thank you. I need your help there. And I love Frankie Bruno because there's only one Frankie Bruno.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's why, by the way, you don't realize this because you're used to the chanting and whatnot that goes on at what we call soccer matches, and you call them football over there. And the chanting is all part of it. And the American audience loves it. So whether there's only one Frankie Bruno, or there's only one Lennox Lewis, or there's only one whoever the fighter might be, it really adds to the excitement of a boxing match in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA.
Last question from me on the Muhammad Ali topic. You mentioned their chanting. What was the fan base like with Muhammad?
Well, by this stage now, everybody loved Muhammad. You know, when Muhammad first started out back when, let's say, he fought in England and had some difficult fights over there before he became world champion. Doug Jones comes to mind. Uh, uh, he had a couple of very tough fights, but by this stage now, he's very, very popular. And so, with that said, again, it's part of the history of boxing that the way he was involved in all this.
Definitely. Now, all of this and more will be read in your upcoming book as well. All the King's Horses and all the Queen's Men. Let's have a little plug on that very quickly. Talk about the
Look at
book.
me grinning. Look at me grinning from ear to ear on that one. All the King's Horses refers to all of Don King's horses, which means the fighters, and all the Queen's Men refers to the British press and the British fighters, all the Queen's Men. So that's where the title came from. It wasn't in concrete, but the guys who promote me over in England, they like the title, and the publishers they talk to love the title, so they're sticking with it. So, I like it because it was my idea, so I especially like it. I don't want to come off as a total egomaniac.
Not at all, not at all. Briefly, tell me about the book and how many more Muhammad Ali stories are in the book.
Well, there's a lot of Muhammad Ali stuff in the book. I've told you two or three of them, but it's not just a book on Muhammad Ali. It's my life in boxing, my life outside of the ring. I mean, the book is about me really, and the fact that I'm you might say the voice of boxing over our lifetime really, and for the foreseeable future, I hope.
Absolutely. Long may it continue. Well, Colonel, thank you very much for your time today. I know we're going to catch up again soon. We're going to move on to some other topics. But for today, the Muhammad Ali episode, we'll leave it there. But thank you again for your time.
Jim, thanks a million. Great to be on with you. And even though all the Queen's Men refer to my enemies in England, I love the British press boys. We had so much fun together over the years.